Yes, now we're going to start writing our layers. For our microservices, I'll explain everything needed here one by one in order to you, friends. First of all, let's start with the entity, friends. Since this is a JPA repository, meaning it's a relational database, your objects here are called entities, friends. They're referred to as entities. Now, these entities need to be defined. The first property you'll define here is the entity. It comes from Jakarta persistence. Of course, since this is an entity, friends, it will also need an ID. Now, to define this as a table here, or rather, instead of just defining it as a table, when you want to create this as a table and set its name or other configurations, you can use the table annotation. You already know the basic logic here. When working with relational databases, you would normally use JDBC to perform operations. But here, Spring Data JPA uses Jakarta persistence and Hibernate in the background. These are ORM tools, friends, in other words, object relational mapping logic. So, with this setup, you can customize the mappings here. So, you can map and configure your entity class to the entity in the database. That's why it can be customized like this. Now, besides this, I also want to add the configurations related to Lombok. Here, you also need to be careful when adding data. I mean, there probably won't be much of a problem with the output. Friends. Now, when you try to use Lombok on large entities, all the methods it generically creates in the background will add extra load for you. That's why it's a good idea to use these Lombok annotations consciously. Let's continue. What are we going to use here? Basically, I wrote down the fields that I want to be present in and out. Now here, I'm immediately marking the ID. In this way, I've created my out. Now, let's continue. I'm adding the repository, friends. We're going to extend this. Why? Of course, we're going to extend JPA repository. Here, outrg. I'm writing it as login. As you know, you no longer need to add repository in Spring. Friends, you don't need to add the repository annotation. It creates a science. For what? From the JPA repository. Since it comes from there, it creates it here. Friends, there's something you need to pay attention to here. Let's say you created a more generic interface for repositories. In other words, let's say you created a general framework specific to your application. Let's write it this way. So let's say what should we call it? I'm just making something up here. I completely made something like this. You can extend JPA repository and write general things here. Friends. For example, let me do it like this. T, ID, I said. Then I came here and said T, ID. Now, when you create something like this, you need to pay attention to this. For example, if you used custom parameters or have something existing in your application, just saying, it's clear, there are operations for searching by IDs. Basically, let's say you have common methods in all your repositories. You can define them here and let the sub-repositories inherit them. But there's an important point you need to pay attention to here. You shouldn't leave your generic repository like this. If you leave it like this, then Spring does the following. It tries to create a bean for the generic repository and fails. It causes problems. So, if you're going to do something like this here, you need to add an annotation like add no repository bean here. Guys. After that, you need to extend your out repository story from my generic repo. So, right here, it's enough to just say my generic repo here. So, will it work if you do it like this? Yes, it will work exactly like this. The generic repository will be up to you. You can write general things there, just so you know. I'm not going to use this. I just wanted to mention this here as a side note for you. Can it stay like this? It can. I mean, I don't have any problem with it, and it won't be a problem for you either. Now, let's continue. We'll continue with the service. Guys. Now, service annotations. You'll add the annotation for the service as well. Guys. Why? Because for a class, in order for it to be recognized by Spring in some way, of course, it needs to have inheritance or it needs to be marked with its own annotations like this. So for the service, we also add the service annotation. And I'm also using required constructor. Guys, I don't really like writing a lot. I mean, writing constructors. That's why I use it this way. Out repository. If we write the credit repository in the same way as these 6 repositories, it will be much more accurate. So I wrote this as well. Guys, look, I'm not going too far. Like, let me write this too. Let me write that too. Let's do this too. And so on. They just write everything all at once. But there's no need for that, guys. So, don't write any method or code you don't need. Let's continue. Here, finally, control.610. Now we've also handled the CI here, and we've written the out controller as well. From here on, we'll be adding, one by one, all the parameters and whatever else we want to exist in a normal out. Guys. So, let's start from here then. What are we going to do? Guys. Our goal in the out controller is for a person to register as a member and then log in by verifying themselves. That's basically our aim. So, what are we going to say then? Public response. I'm going to return the output directly to the response entity, just so we can see it. I mean, after the registration process is done. I'm doing it just to see, otherwise I don't have any other purpose. And here I'll be using post mapping as well. Now, you're going to perform the registration process here. And when you do that, what do you need to take, guys? You need to take parameters. You could write the parameters like this. I mean, you could go with something like string username and so on, but that's not really the right way to do it. What you need to do here, guys, is use a DTO. Never, ever, in these kinds of situations, just go and, well, even if it seems the same, don't do it. It's the same when you're doing a delete operation or searching for something. In those cases, it's okay. You can take the path variable or request parameter. But other than that, you should use a DTO as much as possible. Guys, what is a DTO? It's for data transfer. That's what it's for. Look, now. There are two types of DTOs. The first one is request, and the other is response. Guys, let me show you how it works. Request and response. You'll use a request DTO when taking parameters, and when returning parameters, meaning when sending any response from the entity, you'll use a response DTO. If you do this without using them, you'll run into problems. Guys, I wrote out here, but that's not really correct either. I only wrote this here so we could see what we saved and the parameters we received. Normally, when taking or sending parameters, you should never take or send entities like this. Please don't do this, so don't request entities here. And don't return entities either. Because a user's passwords will also be included in this, as well as other information that shouldn't be given to others. That's why this information shouldn't be here. Alright, neither when receiving nor when returning. So, what are we going to do here? We're going to do a register, guys, so, like this register. I'll call it a request DTO. So, for registration, when someone is signing up, what would you ask for? You'd ask for a string username. You'd ask for a string password. What else? String. Repassword. So, you'd ask for the password again. Why? Because you need to check if the passwords match. If the person typed it wrong, you can't solve it with just one password, it wouldn't be correct. That's why this method is outdated. And also, remember we used to ask for a string email. Let's get the email here as well, guys. So, what about the @ here? Should we get this too? Let me do it like this. I had added a shortcut for that. Let's wait a moment. Guys, I'll add the shortcut like this. Let me show you as well. Now, for example, you wrote the annotations here. You select them like this. And at the top, at the bottom section, there's an SS Live template. Guys, look, when you select like this in the background here, you see the template comes up. You say, for example, Lombok. When you click OK and save, it gives you this feature. Look, when I type LMBK, did you see? These options come up, and when I hit enter, it brings in those things. So, it's a structure that can be used very easily for other things as well. Guys. Alright, now let's move on to the subcontrol. And what do we have here? Guys, you say request body. So, where do the parameters come in with post mapping? They come in the body. That's why you say request body. Then you'll take the parameters as register request to and DTO. Guys, after taking them, what are we going to do here? Here, we're going to perform the save operation. In other words, the registration process. So, how are we going to handle this registration process? Look here, please pay attention. I say return, return. In fact, let's do it like this. First of all, let's say out equals. Let me write a method called outService.register. So let's have a method called register in outService, and I'll send the DTO to it. Guys, don't start doing conversions and stuff here. So don't take the DTO, convert it to out, and then don't write a save method in outService and send the DTO to that. That's a very wrong approach. The main purpose of the controller layer is this. After making sure the parameters received from the user are correct, it passes them to the service layer. Other than that, you shouldn't do any business logic in the controller layer. Guys, you just make sure the correct information is delivered properly and then you return it. Then you just return, say responseentity.ok, and pass the out object here. This is basically what I should be writing. Now, let's pay attention to this as a priority here. So, guys, here we're receiving some information inside the DTO. Now, what I'm saying here is, if the password inside the DTO equals DTO.getRePassword. Now, if these two are not equal to each other, for me, that's an exception. Throw it. If everything is fine, I say go ahead and complete the operations. Guys, okay, so the system will actually work like this. But sir, there isn't a method called register here. I mean, there isn't such a method inside this. You hover over it and say create this method. There's nothing we can do about this. Now we've come here. So what are we supposed to do here? We're going to perform a save operation. So actually, what do I need for output? I need a new output operation, right? Right. I say reposter.save. I say save like this. What do I need here? I need a new out, and I'm going to use the builder build from Lombok. Now here I say username dto.getUsername, then email dto.getEmail, then I say password dto.getPassword. So this way, I've collected this information, and after getting these details, I say return out. Now, have we completed the system? I mean, have we finished it as it should be? We've actually completed it end-to-end for registration. Of course, these have much more detailed structures. Guys, we could do more detailed things, but our main goal here isn't to explain something. It's not to show how deep you can go with these. Our goal here is to understand the microservices concept. That's why I'm not going into the details here. Here, I'm just explaining how to write the things you need to write as they should be. Now here, the out service. Now, I wrote it like this. But look guys, it's not really correct to write things this way if you're not making any changes to them. So, after the register process is done here, you send it to out after out. But why? I mean, why are we creating a new variable and assigning this to a new variable? There's no need. I mean, here it's already returning an out to us. So, it's much more correct to write it this way. Guys. Alright, now let's go to register. Is there anything in register? There is. Guys, I mean, we've done the same thing in register too. It shouldn't be like that in register either. I mean, this should just return like this. Guys, what's the point? Right. So there's no need to define it again in an extra method. As you can see, the register process is also completed this way. Now, after that, we have one more method. And what is that? Public response entity. I'll call this one Boolean. And I'll call this login, guys. So, what are we requesting here? Again, I'll perform the operation here with host mapping, guys. I'm going to send 2 parameters for the login process. There are 2 parameters I want here. String, username, string. Password. I'll take these 2 pieces of information and process them. Let's do it. So, I'm coming here. I say request body. Here. Login, response.dto and 2. So, what are we going to do here? We're going to log in here. If everything is okay, we return a value from this link. So now I say, look. I say return response entity.ok. Then I say outService.login. And I send the DTO to this guy and expect to get a response. Sir, there is no method called login. That's fine. You are going to create it. Look, if you write this from top to bottom, the method you need is this. I mean, after all, we're writing a REST API here. Since we're writing a REST API, we write the methods needed for an endpoint, that is, for an action, here. So, this might also be necessary. Saying things like this could also be needed, and just filling up the service and the repository and moving on is pointless and illogical. Figure out what you actually need and keep going by writing those. Do you need a login here? Then go ahead and write the login. So, here we're going to write the login. Now, what is our TMS thing here? It's going to check whether the username and password we enter actually exist. So, what I'm saying is this: return repository.exists. Of course, based on what? Exists by username and password. I'm saying string dto.getUsername. Wait, where did string come from? dto.username dto.getPassword. Look guys, this is the method. You might say, sir, there's no such method in the repository. I'm telling you, just go ahead and create it yourself. Where? Did we create it here? Inside this, did we create exists by username and password? Yes, we did. That's it. So, we've created this in the service as well. Is everything good now or what? Actually, everything is as it should be. Everything's fine. Now, let's move on to our next topic. I'll show you quickly. Now, if you pay attention here, I haven't written anything for the request mapping or post mapping, meaning I haven't specified the endpoints. Should the endpoints be written? Yes, they should. Guys, you need to write them. So, what are we going to write here? Here, you could write something hard-coded like this. For example, you could come here and write out persistence. Okay, but this isn't really what we want. Guys, writing it like this isn't really the right thing to do. Later on, new versions come out and so on. The names of the endpoints here, or the names we're using, can change. If the project is very large, you'll need to change these variables inside it. You need to reach a certain standard for this. The best way to do this is as follows. Guys, I'm writing a config class, so here in the REST API, I'm creating a class here. Inside this class, guys, public, I say static final string, And we start from here. So what do we have? For example, developer, right? Let's say developer. Then here I put a slash, and let me add a few more like this, developer, and then test. What do you think about these parts? And then version and A. You say, and then what else do we have here? For example, let's say out service. This is it. I say slash out. This is the thing for my out service. What else do we have? There's save, or right now we have register. What else is there? There's login, right? I wrote this here as login as well, guys. Nice. After writing these down too. What am I going to use these for? Look, what are you doing now? Looks like I wrote it wrong. It should be test, not for out, right? Whatever you're going to write for out. Look, is it developer? Is it test? Is it release? What is the version? You need to write these down. Here, I'm saying this. Developer plus versions plus out. So, what about these? These don't have to be the same now. You're going to write these separately. You shouldn't combine them. Now I'll show you what it is and how it's used. Guys, let me move these to the side like this. So you can see. Look, where is this? Isn't this restapis? I got this wrong. Let's fix the name right away. Let's correct it as refactor rename restapis. Now look, guys. Here at the top, you say import. You say import static com.mohammed config restapis star. Now, after adding this, you don't come here and write out, guys. What do you say? You write out service. You come here and say register. You come here and say login. Guys, this is how you use your static values, and you use them everywhere. Then, one day, if you need to switch from developer to test, or to release, you just change it from here. Okay, there are other methods too, but this is the most practical one. This is one of the methods, guys. Alright. In this way, we also handle the basic things that need to be in the out service like this, guys. Now, is everything okay? Is everything written correctly and are they all working? You need to test these. How are you going to test them? I mean, you need to run the application and test it. So, to be able to test these, third-party applications can be used, but there's no need for that, guys. Instead of that, I recommend Swagger to you, and adding Swagger here, using Swagger, would make much more sense. So, we'll add Swagger to the dependencies in Gradle, guys. Of course, we'll add Swagger's UI, the Swagger UI here. Now, Swagger open. In OpenAPI, guys, we need to find a version of OpenAPI. Let's open a web page like this, guys. Now, let's go to the Maven repository. Let's go to OpenAPI UI. OpenAPI.ui, yes, that's the one. Here it's OpenAPI, but we need Swagger. Let's check out OpenAPI UI. OpenAPI web page. Starter. Yes, this one. Version 2.6.0 is out. Guys, we'll use this one. Now, let's add it like this. Right here. Now, its version is 2.6.0, 2, 6, and 0. Then, close this part and add it here. Guys.
I can call this Swagger, like Swagger UI.
Like this, now. First, you add the group family with a colon, then the artifact family, and after that, you add the version. Here, it's enough to add the version as a comma, dot, and duration entry. Look, the addition you make here is not included in the project. This just sets up your library in your ready-made library here. So, teacher, if I'm going to use it in all my microservices, then you can add this to the first root or the main slot. Just come here and type implement equality dot and slot. That will be enough. Then we say refresh our file. So, what will happen now? Swagger UI will be added to all our projects. Just like that. Let's especially run one of our nice applications. Let's see if we can really design and run the application properly. Let's click Run from here to start it and observe whether it works or not. Alright, now we're here. Look, you'll get an error like this. Now, I'm intentionally leaving things like this so you can experience these kinds of issues. Live and learn. Guys, now, there's an error like this. There are a few reasons for this error. The main reason is your required conflicts.